They're always very conservative. That's just really your something. Guys, it didn't like equivalence.
Oh, look at this, 2 Reuters chairs now. I like it. Take it over.
Where's the chair?
Yeah, one's the Charlie Aldinger Memorial Chair.
No, that's the AP chair. Because it belongs to the Dean.
The dean?
Yeah, the Dean of the Pentagon. I don't care, but they might get offended.
Skills tonight.
Charlie the top.
I'll have that chair in my car, no time tonight.
I'll have that plaque on my chair in my office.
Maybe Charlie came in and put it on.
I quite like that. Now we've got them kind of surrounded.
Did Charlie come in tonight and put that on?
I think he did.
He wanted it up there.
Exactly what it just below the words Pentagon.
Yeah.
The Charlie briefing room.
Yeah.
Media suite, I think.
Yeah.
Good morning and welcome. I see that we have a good video here. Let me just make sure we have good audio with Colonel Crowe. This is Brian Whitman at the Pentagon. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir. I read you loud and clear.
Okay, we'll try that one more time again. Colonel Crowe, this is Brian Whitman at the Pentagon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. I can hear you fine.
Excellent. Well, Colonel, thank you for joining us this morning, and good morning to the Pentagon Press Corps. Today, our briefer is Marine Colonel William Crowe, who is the commander of the Regimental Combat Team 7. His area of operation includes more than 30,000 square miles and spans the Syrian Jordan borders to the Euphrates River. His unit assumed responsibilities for security in this area in February of 2006. And so they've been there quite some time, and his perspectives, I think, will be helpful and insightful for all of us. It is the first time that we've had you in this format, though, Colonel, and typically what we do is give you an opportunity to give us an overview, and then we get into some questions for you. So with that, let me just turn it over to you.
Sir, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity. This is my first time doing this, and I got to tell you, because we've been pretty busy out here this past year, and I'm extremely proud of what the Marines, soldiers, and sailors of Regimental Combat Team have done this past year. And I emphasize soldiers as well, because I've got a task force from Germany, Task Force 136, that works for me out here. I want to start off quickly by just going through a few points, and I want to save the majority of the time for the question and answers, if that's all right. I want to start off with our mission statement, because I think it's important for people to understand. And then, of course, this might elicit some questions towards the end. Our primary task here was support development to the effective Iraqi security forces, but also a task was to defeat anti-Iraqi forces in my AO, and this is AO Denver, which does have 33,000 square miles, and to get a picture of it, you'd understand it's about the size of South Carolina. And so you get a picture of South Carolina in your mind, and that's the AO that I'm responsible for. It's one of the largest regimental AOs, or BCT AOs, in all of Iraq. It's sparsely populated, which gives us the larger the AO. Of course, we're doing this through partnered, combined, and joint counterinsurgency COIN operations. We work well and work with other agencies in this AO on a daily basis, to include the units I'll mention here shortly. And our key thing is to deny the AIF the ability to influence the areas in Ramadi and Fallujah and ultimately into Baghdad through the foreign fighters coming across the borders on our AO that run from Syria, as you mentioned. We also have borders in Jordan, and my higher headquarters, which is MEF 1 Forward, has a border area, a MEF security area that runs along the Saudi border as well. A large area to encompass and a lot of responsibility. And lastly, it's to enable transition of independent Iraqi Security Force Operations in Zone. That's our mission statement. Now, how do we go about doing that? Now, I'll start with Al-Qaim, and I was informed that you were given a laydown, and I'm sure quite a few of your reporters there are familiar with the map of Western Anbar. I'll start with Al-Qaim and work a clock system back around to Al-Qaim along the Syrian border. Al-Qaim, out there I have 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. It's a Marine Infantry battalion. They're partnered with 3rd Brigade, 7th Iraqi Division, and 2 battalions from that brigade in the Al-Qaim region, which the key city there is Husayba. That would be 1st Battalion and 3rd Battalions of that brigade are in that Al-Qaim region. I move over to Rawa, which is on the Euphrates River Valley, and a small town called Ana, which are key cities as we link Al-Qaim to the Haditha region, which I'll talk to shortly. In Rawa, I have 2nd Battalion, 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, and they're partnered with 1 Iraqi battalion from 3rd Battalion, 3rd Brigade to the west, as I mentioned previously. As I come around to what would be my 3 o'clock, I'm in Haditha. And Haditha is a region, we all know about the city of Haditha, but Haditha, the region, is made up of Haklaniya, Barwana, and Haditha, which are the primary 3 cities, the area that we call the Triad out here. In the Triad, I currently have 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, which is based out of Hawaii. And I have 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, which recently joined us in the end of November as part of 15th MU, which I'll address towards the end of my comments. They're partnered with 2nd Battalion, 2nd Brigade, the Iraqi 7th Division. Down in Baghdadi, I have the 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Brigade, and they're partnered with a 4th Reconnaissance Battalion out of Al-Assad, our main air base where my headquarters is located and where I'm speaking from now. Down in Heat, which is approximately 30 miles west of Ramadi, and I can walk you through the importance of these towns individually later. But in Heat, I have Task Force 136, as I previously mentioned. It's an Army mechanized tank unit, and they're partnered with 1st Battalion of the 2nd Brigade, 7th Division. Down in Rupa, which was formerly part of my AO, is currently the 15th MU command element, and they have been given that area of responsibility as they've come ashore the past 45 days. They currently have responsibilities for the port of entry of Walid, which comes into the Syrian border, and a port of entry of Trabeel, which is a major resupply route for this entire operations in Iraq from Trabeel, from the Jordan and the ports there. When we arrived last January and took over transition of authority in February, there wasn't a single Iraqi policeman in AO Denver and Western Anbar. And I'm proud to announce today that there's over 3,000 Iraqi, and we call them Shurka, in AO Denver. And Al-Qaim, which is our best example of the oil spot or ink blot theory, how you prefer to use it. Al-Qaim, the conditions were created out there last year with 8 combined battalions conducting a clear in Operation Steel Curtain that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, 5 coalition battalions, and 3 Iraqi battalions from the 1st Brigade created success out there, and we held. And we held that with 1 American battalion, coalition forces, and 3 Iraqi battalions that gave the local population the confidence to back their government and stand up a police force of today is over 1,400 Iraqi police that are well-trained, well-equipped, and well-led. A year ago when we arrived here, these Iraqi brigades, they were the 2 newest brigades in the Iraqi Army. So we had all those challenges that we've lived those challenges that the American people have heard about and that the reporters have written about. But I can tell you today, after weathering a lot of those challenges, I've got 2 brigades that are prepared to fight at the platoon and the company level. I have battalions that are prepared to go to trade level 2, which enables them to take over battle space. The only limiting factor that we have at this time is numbers of Iraqi soldiers in these 2 brigades. And I'll answer that quickly. The number of Iraqi soldiers, obviously the priorities, AO Denver and RCT-7, I'm supporting mission for Multinational Forces West task. Multinational Forces West is supporting to the higher headquarters, which is Multinational Corps Iraq. The priority in Iraq, obviously, is Multinational Forces Baghdad. So we're a supporting element of the actions that take place in Baghdad. So in other terms, we're on the end of the spigot. But we are getting those troops out here. They're well led and trained. The two Iraqi brigade commanders that I'm partnered with, Colonel Ishmael of 3rd Brigade and Colonel Bassam of 2nd Brigade, are professional military men. And we have conversations, even though through interpreters in broken English and in my few words of Arabic, we are of like minds in how this AO should look, how we should position our forces. And every decision I make is made off of recommendations and suggestions from them. We are to the point now whereas I'm making recommendations to them as they position their forces throughout this AO. We still have a ways to go in recruitment of Iraqi soldiers. And we call them Jundi in this AO. And that's our priority now, is taking young Sunni men from the Western Euphrates River Valley and bringing them into the Iraqi Army. We've had great success with recruiting for Iraqi police. And in some ways, we've overexceeded our expectations. Our goals were close to 4,000 Iraqi police this year, and we recruited over 3,000, and we have hundreds in school. And this week we shipped off another 50 Iraqi police recruits. But in areas throughout the AO, we've shifted our focus towards the Iraqi Army because we need to build the local Iraqi forces that are familiar with that terrain. So our focus now is on Iraqi Army recruitment. I'd like to quickly go through the lines of operations because as I talk about the development of the Iraqi police and Iraqi Army concurrently, to be enabled to have the success of recruiting, we have to have the support of the local community. The tribal engagements that we're hearing about now being reported upon, we've been dealing with the tribes here for almost 12 months. A lot of these engagements take time. We have to win the confidence of the local leaders. First of all, we have to bring security. And we have to protect the civilian population. And as we've all aware of, there's been a very intensive murder intimidation campaign in western Anbar and through the entire province this past year. But our number one task out here is to protect that civilian population, to gain their confidence, to build that IP and IA capability. And we do need to have that through coalition presence in areas out here. On the security the lines of operations, I would say the atmospherics from Al-Qaim range, and I get daily reports, are neutral to positive in Al-Qaim. In towns through Rawa and Ana, just this past week, as we've detained individuals, we've had local nationals clapping as the Iraqi Army, the Iraqi police, and the Marines have brought in individuals that they know who are bad, but in the past they might have been too afraid to point them out because of what would happen if they did that. To promote the governance, we're working very hard on the judicial system at this time. We've built the Iraqi police. We're building their police stations. We've equipped them, and we've given them hundreds of vehicles, and we're supplying them with all the accoutrements of war, to include helmets, personal protection, RPKs, AK-47s, ammunition, and training SWAT teams and special tactics teams throughout the AO. The next phase is we're focused on is the judicial system throughout this AO. Due to the murder intimidation, that is a challenging aspect of our task. But we're going to make mission. We know what we have to do, provide security for those judges, for the courthouses, and get them into conducting their normal business. The rule of law is returning to Western Anbar, and the people want the rule of law. They want the stability that comes along with following rules and regulations. These people, as most peoples, will want order in their lives and stability, and I believe that firmly believe that we're doing that. I mentioned before the tribal engagement. I'm not going to talk about specific tribes that we're engaging with, but what I can tell you is the major tribes in my part of the AO. This afternoon as I was coming to this meeting, one of the Paramount Sheikh's uncle was in my office meeting with my staff prior to coming here. And that's significant for us. His tribe alone has provided over 800 IP to the police in the Heat region and in my southern boundary, and has now made a commitment to close to 200 to 300 volunteers for the Iraqi Army. And these are those small rays of hope that we see that are starting throughout the AO. On economic development, I mentioned before that the POE, port of entries down to Trabeel and Walid, are open. We've made great strides in the past year to stem the corruption that takes place in ports of entry. And I will mention ports of entry, corruption doesn't happen just in Iraq. We have challenges in our own country, so you can imagine the challenges that we have on our borders. We have those challenges here as well with people coming across. But we've made great strides in the training of the professional individuals from the Border Patrol that are here. We call them the poets, and they're the port of entry transition teams and the brigade transition teams training the Iraqi brigades along the border. A year ago, when they conducted operations, they would not move, sir, unless they had forces from my command standing by as a quick reaction force. Over the past 2 weeks, they have operated independently, going into no man's land, arresting 50 to 100 persons who were doing fake documentations, passports, license plates, etc. So we see vast improvement there. Western Anbar is primarily an agricultural region, and we spend a lot of time working on irrigation. We have something in Iraq, in Western Iraq, that most countries in the Middle East wish they had, and that's not oil, it's water. And we're exploiting the Euphrates River Valley, and we're spreading, I call that goodness, that green, kilometers at a time or feet at a time as we start to grow more date palms, palm trees, the orange blossoms, etc. In our province, we also have one phosphate plant that's government owned and 2 concrete plants, which right now we're working hand in hand with the Iraqi government and our other agencies, U.S. governmental agencies, to bring more power to those stations, to make them more profitable, and to hire more local nationals. The Iraqi Railroad is up and running from Beji to Akashat, which is on the Syrian border, to Al-Qaim, moving product from that phosphate plant, and in the future to move concrete throughout the country. It runs through Al-Qaim, through Haseba, up into Beji. The plans are to open the rest of that rail later this summer from Haditha down to Ramadi. Lastly, on the economic side, we have the K3 oil refinery, and their studies are being conducted there to see if we can get that back up into production. I've already talked about the security forces, and I'm prepared to discuss in detail what we have done on training and enhanced training that we have done on our own to enhance our capabilities. And the essential services, I'm prepared to discuss those as the questions are asked. In closing, I've got 2 Iraqi brigades out here that are prepared to march. And I've got Iraqi police forces that are operating independently and that are taking the fight to the enemy. Sir, subject to your questions, that concludes my brief.
Well, thank you, Colonel. And we do have a few questions here in the audience, and so we'll get right into it. Pam.
Colonel, this is Pam Hess with United Press International. I was out in your AO a couple years ago with your predecessor, Craig Tucker. So it's interesting to hear what you're talking about for me. Could you tell us how many of Jundi you're short? And is it that across Iraq it's been easier to recruit soldiers rather than police, but in your AO it seems to be the opposite. Is it because of perceptions about the Shiite-controlled government? And would you also characterize for us the level of the murder and intimidation campaign? Do you have any way of characterizing that? How many people or how many judges have been killed or threatened?
I'll answer the first question. The battalions out here are about 50%. I have two battalions that are 60%, but overall they're 50% across the board. The battalions that are out here, there's 6 battalions. They're primarily made up of Shia from south of Baghdad. Out west in Al-Qaim 3rd Brigade, the brigade commander is a Mahal from the Mahal tribe, and he is Sunni. We do have quite a few of the Jundi out west are Sunni, and we just recruited over 300 here in the past 2 months and inducted them through boot camp and back out to Al-Qaim and going back to the region. But to answer your question on the Army in any more detail, in the past, if you joined the Iraqi Army, you could serve anywhere in Iraq. And in Western AO, in AO Denver, this year was the year of the Iraqi Army and the year of Iraqi police, because we didn't have Iraqi Army last year in 2005. So we're recruiting from the same pool at the same time. And any recruiter will tell you that's a difficult thing to do. It's more appealing to become a policeman because you get to go home at night and stay with your family. If you're in the Army, you could be stationed somewhere else. MOD right now is considering allowing the Sunni that would want to enlist in Anbar to stay in Anbar and go to the brigades that they were recruited from. And once that becomes official, I see great numbers of young men coming in and joining the Iraqi Army. Now, to answer your second part of your question, in murder intimidation, the judges right now are not working, and to date, no judges have been targeted. Now, once they start to work, we will have to have a plan to protect them. The murder intimidation is aimed towards the average Iraqi civilian. And I'll give it to you about as plain as I can. An example out of Haditha. There's probably 4 to 5 civilians murdered a month between the age of 14 and 80, and it doesn't matter who you are and who you know. That's how murder intimidation works. That's what keeps people from talking. That's what keeps people complacent, and they just stay in their homes. It's random, for no reason at all, and you multiply that times 4 years, that's the average just out of that one area alone. So I would let you do the math. But that's murder intimidation. Did I answer your question?
Sir, thank you.
Andrew.
Colonel, it's Andrew Gray from Reuters. As I'm sure you're aware, that the President has announced a plan to bring more troops to Iraq, including to Anbar province. Do you need more U.S. forces there? Could you use them, and what would you use them for?
Okay, sir, I heard that you talked about the more forces coming to Anbar, and could I use them? Is that correct?
Yeah, Brian, you.
That's correct, yes. That is the essence of the question.
Okay. Okay, we, as I said in my opening statements, and I might have talked quickly, we have received additional forces in November from the 15th MU, which is out of the West Coast. The battalion that came ashore with the 15th MU, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, has gone into the Haditha Triad area. Some of those troops also have gone down into Rupa, so we've had an influx of forces. But I also need to go back to my earlier statement, is that we had lost a battalion earlier in the summer that was pulled to Baghdad, that you're probably familiar with as 414th Cavalry from 172nd Stryker Brigade was pulled out and went to Baghdad. So we've lost forces and we've gained some. Could a commander use additional forces? I don't think there's a commander in any conflict in American history wouldn't say he'd take more forces. But what I will tell you is when we do get additional forces, I know where they need to go. My Commanding General knows where they need to go. And when they come here, he'll make that decision.
Jeff.
Colonel Jeff Schogel, Stars and Stripes. We've heard that the situation in Anbar is an economy of force situation. Can you talk about how many more U.S. and coalition troops it would take to address that?
Well, I think I just answered that before, but the economy of force operations, when you're the economy of forces, there's a main effort somewhere else. And so the main effort, the President made it pretty clear where the main effort is. General Clacy's made it very clear where the main effort is, and it is Baghdad. And so I won't tie coalition force troops to our requirements. I would put that back as the answer for this regimental combat team is Iraqi troops. Bring those battalions up to 80 or 90%, then we'll make mission here.
Let's go over here to Joe.
Colonel, this is Joe Tabit with Al-Hurra. How could you describe the situation on the Syrian border? Do you have numbers and figures about the foreign fighters' infiltration into Iraq? And let me ask you a question too. Is there any kind of cooperation with the Syrian authorities on the border?
Okay, sir, I'll start, since I have two outposts on the border, I'll start down at Waleed. Down at Waleed, where we had the port of entry that I spoke to you before, the Iraqi government has control of the POEs. It's sovereign territory of the Iraqi government, so my forces there are supporting the Iraqi government. So we first need to make that clear. We're there to train them and support them. So the Iraqi forces have contact with the Syrian border patrol individuals through the no man's land, through consultations as governments normally do on the border. As far as U.S. forces down at Waleed, no, we do not have contact with the Syrian forces, nor do we have it with the Jordanian forces. Once again, that's the sovereign Iraqi territory. They're capable of doing that, and they do it 24/7, 365 days a year. Now, up to the port of entry in Husayba is closed. And so there's no interaction right now between the Syrian port of entry individuals and the director of the POE in Husayba. Now, sometime this year, and I would say late spring, early summer, the conditions have been set, individuals have been trained, we've rebuilt the POE, and the security is there. We'll open the POE in Husayba. That decision will be made by the Iraqi government and Commanding General of Multinational Forces West and the Commanding General of Multinational Forces Iraq making recommendations on that. So to answer your question in short, no, we do not have daily contact with the Syrians.
The infiltration.
Excuse me, I didn't hear that.
Second part about
That question was with respect to Syrian infiltration along the border.
Oh. Okay, I understand about the foreign fighter that come across the border. What I would remind you, and I would ask each one of you, I don't know if a map of our AO is before you there. It'd help me talk about it better. But if you take from the southern area, boundary of my border, and go to the north, it's hundreds of square miles, as I said before. Do foreign fighters come across the border? Yeah, they probably do. They're not in platoon formations. And so if two came across the border a month, you'd have about 60. There's no large influx of foreign fighters come across the border. But what I will remind you is smuggling has been taking place in this part of the world for thousands of years. The tribes that live along the border are the same tribes on the Syrian. And so the relationships are not Iraqi or Syrian, they're blood relatives. And so the smuggling that takes place is not just people, it's also sheep, it's eggs, it's cigarettes, and the majority of the time when we stop someone, I'll call it infiltrating or moving across the border, it turns out to be someone with Iraqi sheep going into Syria. Because anybody who's been out here long enough understands that Iraqi sheep are better than Syrian sheep.
I think I'll leave that one alone. We're just about at the end of our time. But go ahead.
Mike, Navy from Aviation Week, and my question sort of could follow up to those, not as funny response, I hope. But anyway, in terms of the coin operations along the border there, can you give me an idea of what you need in terms of capability, in terms of equipment or platforms? And the second part to that, you mentioned you're trying to do Euphrates River right there, trying to gain some benefit from that. But it's my understanding, too, that's also used as a means of smuggling. And so give me an idea of what you need to make sure you can safeguard that as well.
Well, what I'd say, first of all, is everything that we need, we've been provided. And so the forces that are in Al-Qaim, we're forcing the enemy to bounce further north outside our AO, and we have disrupted greatly his ability to get across the border in the Hisaba area, which makes him obviously have to pay more money, hire more people on the Syrian side to move contraband and people across. One of the things, I won't go into great detail what we've done on operations, we have attrited the cells that run north of the Euphrates River Valley, in some cases up to 70 to 80%. This is AQIZ cells that are operating in the foreign fighter facilitators, and the equipment and the munitions for making IEDs that make their way into areas like Mosul, into Baghdad and Ramadi. And we've had significant success stopping that. Our operations in Haditha the past month have dropped attacks up to 50% in the triad area of Haditha. Small arms has dropped 75% in that area, and that's bringing that one coalition battalion additional into the area from there. Detainments from ISF alone were over 100 in 1 month in that area. So across the entire Euphrates River Valley, areas we call the Nerve, which is the northern Euphrates River Valley, to the Central Valley, down to Heat, we're starting to use waterborne craft more often. We're using our heliborne assets. We're not tied to FOBs. We're out conducting raids, heliborne raids, almost every 48 hours in this AO. And so if they've got an island on the river, if we haven't been on it, we're going to be on it shortly. And some of our most significant caches that we've pulled off, I don't have them all here in front of me here, would be finds like 7 SA-7s, enough IED making material to take 800 IEDs off the street, and that's a low estimate, to, of course, capturing and killing quite a few of the anti-Iraqi forces that operate in this area that do harm to the people.
Colonel, we have reached the end of our time, and we do appreciate you spending some of it with us this evening. And just for a point of clarification, Colonel, on the 800 materials for making 800 IEDs, was that in a single cache or was that in multiple?
Cache.
We missed it. Could you say it again?
We've had some significant success. Are you going to ask me one more question?
We just wanted to clarify with respect to your last answer, the materials for making IEDs, you said that you've been able to take materials equivalent to 800 IEDs off the street. Was that in a single cache, or was that multiple stores that you've discovered?
If I could provide, if someone asked a question and wanted some details, I could provide you a list of the multiple stores. That was just one cache. We found a logistics hub north of the river with our riverine forces and my ground forces working with Special Operations Forces and my conventional forces. We found a logistics hub in an area, and it wasn't just IED making material. We found enough what we call documentations to run the DocX that were significant that I can't talk in this level of detail. Just to give you one example, in Operation Majid, which is a glorious one, which I named after the Iraqi Chief of Staff who was killed with me. It's a senior officer to be killed in AO Denver this past year. Last May, he and I were attacked by an IED, and he was targeted and killed by the Iraqi forces. In his operation up in the Triad this past 30 days, we uncovered 70 caches. And that runs the whole gamut from SA-7s down to mortar tubes of various calibers, to include to 500 pounds of explosives and propellant. These are things that I believe the American people need to know, that the Marines and soldiers and sailors out there every day, and we're hunting these folks down with the help of the Iraqi people. The more security that we can bring, the coalition presence that we've had in the Triad has allowed us to do this past, and that's only a 30-day. It's 70 weapons caches, and I'd be happy to provide anybody who asks for it the roll-up of that 30-day operation. It's significant.
Well, again, thank you, Colonel, and we do appreciate your time. We know that you're coming towards the end of your tour, and so we wish your unit safe travels. And just before I close it off, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you again for this opportunity. It's being out in AO Denver, at one time I called this the Wild Wild West, and it still is. There's areas that people who have been to Husayba before, areas are still dangerous. But I can tell you that there's areas out here that I've had commanders ask me, can we take off our protective gear? We call it the PPE. And there's areas here that there might be a time in the future that you could take off your equipment and walk around. I'd also like to thank the American people for their support. Of course, we just came through the holidays over here, and the packages coming in from the American people is amazing, the support that we received here. And we spread that through the entire AO by helicopter with my chaplains taking their gifts and presents and stockings out to the people. And I'd like to thank them as well. In closing, of course, I'd like to thank our families for what they've done to support us out here. It's been a difficult year for all the units out here, but the cost is worth it. They understand the sacrifices that we make here, and I want to thank them for their support and our loved ones back at home. And in closing, I'd like to tell you something I told our regiment last year before we came, and I told our families, and I promised them this, is, Marines, and I think most people in the audience who worked with us before, we don't plan to fail. We didn't come here to tie, and we didn't come here to lose. We came here to win. And I'd invite everybody in that audience to come out here and see what we have done. If you've been here before, I can walk you down streets that you've never walked down before. I can show you the most prosperous market, that on market day, 6,000 to 10,000 people come in from the desert in Husayba to go to the market to buy their goods. So good things are happening out here. I look forward to seeing you out here in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Colonel.